So we're in this series called Evergreen, and it's how to live your faith in today's society, because it's tough, right? And it's always been tough. That's the thing. We think it's only just been tough for us. It's really been tough for everybody. But we want to have a vibrant, living, growing faith. And so last week we talked, and what we're doing is we're actually looking in, because it's springtime and you guys are all planting grass seed, probably putting in your flowers, in a couple of weeks and all those kinds of things. It's all in our minds, right? Right now is all gardening, and we're, pulling up all the branches that have fallen down over the course of the winter, and all cleaning up our yards and whatever. It's in our minds. Of course, when you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, even if you go to a grocery store, you can't get by walls of dirt, right? Bags of dirt. And I can't help but think of the old, generations past, what they would think. Bottled water and bagged dirt. You could just dig it up if you wanted to, but no, I gotta go down to No Frills and buy myself 5 bags of dirt. Anyways, just a little diversion. It's what's happening, right? It's what's happening around us right now. And so we're looking into the parables of Jesus. And Jesus gave all kinds of parables about the kingdom. He used money. He had stories about lost sons. He had stories about lost sheep. And he also gave a bunch of fantastic stories about agriculture. There was a lot of farmers in the day. In fact, most people would farm because that's how they would get their food. And so Jesus oftentimes would take a kingdom principle and talk about it through the lens of somebody who was planting, or somebody who was weeding, or somebody who was growing something. And that's helpful because we're all kind of in the same boat. Last week I told a story about trying to get my soil ready because I had to grow some grass. Remember, I was trying to cut my grass and you couldn't even tell. The grass was so bad. It was like a dust bowl. I mean, I would literally be choking on dust as I was mowing my lawn, and I didn't know where I started, where, how you know that line? If you got a nice primo lawn, right? You cut your grass and you're like, oh, that's nice. And you can see where it's cut and it's 2 different heights, and you're just like, this is good. But if you don't have any point of reference, because there's no difference between what you're cutting, I don't even know why I was going on in the first place. It was just a dust bowl. Anyways, I conditioned the lawn, and then we planted all the seed. My story this week is about that seed. Because, of course, I did what every normal person would do. I went down, David, to the garden center, and I was like, okay, I'm going to buy the good stuff. So I went down and bought the 150 kilogram bag. Got a hernia, it was 40 kilograms. But still, it was weighed a lot. It was a lot of seed. I'm like, the seeds are so small. How do they? Anyways, I put it in the car. I got it home, and then I overseeded. I killed that thing with seed. I'm just like, you're getting seed. Some of these are going to grow. I don't know if all of them are going to grow, but some of these are going to grow. And within a couple of weeks, it takes about that long for grass to germinate and stuff. I was disappointed, furious. I was a number of things that weren't Christian, I'll tell you that. Because what came up was some grass, but what also came up was a whole ton of weeds. And those bags, I never clued into this before because I was a young person. I didn't care about grass. I'm like, yeah, that's for somebody who's retired. The retirees can care about their grass. Get off my lawn, that kind of guy. I wasn't there quite yet. I was just kind of coming. I was a rookie grass grower. But since I've looked at the bags, and I noticed right on the top, it's not fine print, it's there, but it's kind of hidden. It's, an aside. It says 99.9% weed free. And then I ran back and looked at my bag. No disclaimer. I basically bought a bag of field stuff, whatever it was. And so I was just, at that point, I was just thankful because I was like, at least it's green, and at least I can tell where my lawnmower's going. That's all I cared about. And so I cut, and I was very disappointed and a little bit upset because how do you get all of that out of there now? You can't spray it, the only way to do it is just cut the whole thing up and resawed the entire, which of course, on being on a fixed income or whatever it was, we were like, well, we just don't have the money for that. Okay, well, I guess we're going to be the weed family, right? Okay. Just let me go quickly past that so nobody. I didn't even plant the things, and there they are. And you guys got this? Like I have an interlock brick driveway, and it's like half interlock brick and half like weeds that came up that I don't want there, and I never asked to be there, and I never put there, but they're there. Our parking lot, Luke, yes, I'm looking at you, right? Because we have this conversation all the time. Half our parking lot is weeds. Who planted the weeds? Like, why are they there? They don't belong there. Let's have a nice gravel, crisp, clean parking lot. Like all the OCD people driving to the parking lot, and you gotta kind of look away for a bit because it's like half. And now the people are like, yeah, I don't care. I care. I feel like though, and we're going to get to a point in a second. You probably know the parable I'm going to. Isn't this like life? Isn't this like life? Like you try to prepare the soil. You try to get it ready. You try to make it as good as you can. You water it and you till it and you kind of work away at it. And then when you get seed, you try to get the best seed you can. You put the seed in and you're like, okay, I hope this works. And then what comes up is like weeds and what you wanted. I wanted that job and the job was going to be so good. I had all these answers. And then I got the job and yeah, it was good. But then, yeah, the weeds. I wanted to be a parent and it was so great early on. And it was a blessing. I have a little baby at home. And then I had to get up every 3 hours to feed the baby. And then it started pooping. And then, and then it started to say no. And then it kicked down the baby gate. And then it climbed out of the crib. And then it broke the vase. Right? I went to church. And the church was so great. It was exactly the church that I wanted. It was the church I was looking for. And then all of a sudden you met that saint or those saints. Or that issue came up in the church. And you're like, why? Why? I didn't want any of this stuff. I wanted it to be good. I was putting forth my best effort. And then this is what I got. When you look at the world, it's the same thing. For all of the people who are do-gooders in the world, right? Like I feel like every person under the sun now has got a cause, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And yet the world is just rife with pain and evil. If we're going to be honest today, let's be honest. And it's like, why, God? I don't want there to be mental illness. I don't want there to be, all of these things that are prevalent in our society today. But they're there. And if we as the church are going to stay evergreen, if we are kind of like these stalks of good seed that has grown up, but there's weeds all around, how in the world do we stay evergreen in that context? I don't know about you, but I'm in. I need the answer to that question. I'm so thankful that Jesus kind of gave us an answer to the question. And it may not be the answer you're looking for, and it may not be the answer you want, it may not be the answer you expect, but it's the answer Jesus gave. And so whenever I look for an answer and I'm hoping it's the answer that I want, but Jesus gives a different one, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, that's probably better anyways. And that's what Jesus does in Matthew 13. So last week we talked about soil. Jesus is right at the peak of his career, or peak of his ministry. It's about 1.5 years in. And he gives this parable. He was down by the waterside and all these people started crowding him. He got in a boat and he kind of steps back a little bit. He teaches this whole message on the soil, which we talked about last week. And then he talks a little bit more. He talks about the mustard seed. First, he explains it to the disciples just in the boat, which I thought was very rude of Jesus. And I might take that up with him when I get to heaven, but I probably won't touch it. But he explains the one parable to the disciples, and then he gives the parable of the mustard seed, and then he gives this parable, which is like, it's about as deep and long as a parable could be. This is not light stuff. We'll talk about the context in just a second. And Jesus told him another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. That would have been little Robbie on his front lawn. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and it went away. Everybody say enemy? Enemy. Okay. Let's go to the next one. Verse 26. It says, when the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. How disappointing is that, right? How disappointing is that? I think about churches. I sowed into that church for years, And then the weeds started coming. I was a parent and I sowed everything I had into my kids. And then the weeds started coming. Right? You can. Anyways, the owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field?" Which is like, okay, it's pretty audacious to say that to the Lord. But where did the weeds come from? And this is the question I'm at. I didn't plant these on my driveway, but they're there. I didn't plant them on the parking lot, but they're there. All of these things. What is going on with this issue of sin and evil? As much as we try to do what's right, Jesus responds, "An enemy did this," he replied. And this is in the story. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" Which is like the obvious answer, right? Well, let's just pull them up. I remember when I was doing a VBS one year, and we had this was at my last church in Innisfil, and we had these guys that would take care of our lawn, but for whatever reason they didn't take care of the lawn. It was VBS, and all these weeds were about 3 feet high. And so I was the games guy that time, and so Pastor Scott, you'll love this. I was like, we can't play games on this. Like, it's just like nobody can run. It's like running in water. It's just weeds everywhere. Anyways, what I did was I told them that there was a game of which team can get the most weeds. Right?
That's a good game.
I was like, let's just weed this puppy right now. I got an army of children, slave labor or whatever. And so my senior pastor comes out, because you can imagine what that looked like afterwards. It looked like the surface of the moon. And of course, kids are running up with fire at this man, and they're pile, and they're like blocking their pile, and they're being all protective and stuff. It was a gong show, and I was like, well, at least we got rid of the weeds. But it looked horrible, and that's what Jesus is talking about here. He's like, yeah, you don't want to put, no, you're gonna, when you do that, you're going to wreck all the grass too. Like, everything's going to get wrecked. Okay, we got a real problem here. Let both grow together, and this is where it gets super funky, and you're going to have to put your eyes of faith on here. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at that time I will tell the harvesters, which is not you, by the way, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. So let's just leave it there for a second. So you see this scenario. I mean, I've read about some scholars that talk about the 7 little points here, and I don't want to go through them all because I want to get to the application. But there's a couple things that we cannot miss. It's crucial to the text. It's crucial to the story. It's crucial to the application. And this is more application than even Jesus, or different application than Jesus will give. Just be confident in what you've done. In this parable, the master sowed good seed. And oftentimes, something bad will happen in your life. It's at work, it's at church, it's in a relationship, it's whatever. It's with your children. And what do? You blame yourself, don't you? Well, if I would have been, if I just would have, and I shouldn't have, and if I did, and you beat yourself up. I just want to get out there right at the beginning that this was no fault of the wheat. No fault of the wheat. Okay? Also, this idea about the enemy. You know what Jesus said in John 10:10? That there's a thief, and he comes to steal and kill and destroy, and he's your enemy. He's like, well, why is that weed on my driveway? I don't know why it's there, but I know why the weeds are in my heart. I know why the weeds are in my relationship. I know because there's an enemy. And after God has planted all this good stuff, the enemy comes along. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And you can say, oh, that's like cartoon, that's fantasy land, all you want. But just look at your life. Look at my life. Look at the world. There is something going on here. And Jesus hits the nail on the head when he goes, there is an enemy. And he says it more than once. We're going to refer to it in a couple of seconds. And I feel like sometimes the questions aren't only internal, but the questions sometimes are external, aren't they? Right? Sometimes people come at us and they judge us, and they're like, well, this would be different in your life if you had only, and so forth. Anyways, leave it there. Jesus, we talked about this last week. Jesus doesn't always explain his parables, but with the parable of the soil and with this parable of the wheat and the tares, Jesus actually explains it. So it's like, okay, well, I'm all ears because I kind of get it, but this is his explanation. He says, then he left the crowd, and this is different. This is kind of like the boat. He was with the soil. He was in the boat, and he told the whole story to the multitudes, but then he shared the explanation only with the disciples. And then with this one, he told the multitudes, and then it says, then he left the crowd and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, and they actually asked him, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. And then, so you can't get around this. This is Jesus' explanation. These are his literal words. So you can't get around any of this stuff. This is not Pastor Rob's thoughts or philosophies or answer. This is literally the words of Jesus. And he answered, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age. Everybody say the end.
The end.
And the harvesters are angels. Go to the next one. As the weeds are pulled up and are burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will be thrown into the blazing furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. I told you this is going to be challenging. Jesus was not politically correct. He was just like, this is what's going to happen at the end of the age. Those ones who are good wheat and valuable and all those things, doing good and serving me, this is what's going to happen to them. Those who aren't, the ones who are sown of the devil, the ones who are involved in wickedness and evil, are going to be burned for eternity. I get that's troubling. That's alarming, isn't it? The context of this message is, if you go back you can go back to Matthew 5 and 7. That's probably my favorite piece of scripture. If I could just import that into every Christian, on the planet, that would be enough. The Sermon on the Mount. That's really all you need to do to live for Jesus. Just read that and live by that. But then you see Jesus rise to prominence. In Matthew 10, he sends out 72 disciples. He picks his disciples along the way, and he starts to have these miracles. And then in Matthew 11, you see John the Baptist arrested. And so there's a little bit of trouble afoot. It's all been uphill until then. Like, everything was just kind of going great. And then in Matthew 12, after he sees John the Baptist being taken away, the urgency of Jesus comes to the fore. And John the Baptist is taken away. And then in Matthew 12, Jesus is questioned about healing somebody on the Sabbath. And when he comes back to them, when they accuse him, they say, "Oh, you're a son of the devil." And Jesus is like, "Oh, that's curious. Would the devil do something to defeat the devil? I don't think so." And so there, all of a sudden there's this tension between the religious leaders. And so Jesus figures out that at that point that they've rejected him as the Messiah. And so, I don't think Jesus ever took anything personally, but you would take that personally. Jesus has done all these great works. He's given all these great speeches. He's got these great crowds. He's got these great followers. He's doing all these good things. You would think everybody would be like, "Bro, yeah, we love you. We'll just keep following you." And all of a sudden what they do is they start to antagonize him. They start to question him. They start to tear down everything that he has worked for up to that point. And so you see the tone change. And Jesus is like, "Okay, let me tell you about 4 soils. Some soils, you're not getting it in. And some soils, yeah, they'll take it for a little bit, but there's no roots. And then other soils, you know what? They're just worried about too many other things. But there are some soils where if my word goes in, it's going to grow 30, 60, 100, which was last week." And then he tells this parable at the same time. where he's just like, there is evil in the world. There are people, no matter what you tell them, no matter how much good you're going to do for them, they're gonna turn your back on them. They'll spit in your face. They will tear you down the instant they get the chance. And so I feel like Jesus, in the context of this particular parable, he uses this parable because of what is happening in his ministry. And it awakens their curiosity. So what do we do with this? What do we do with this sort of troubling and alarming thing? This thing where we're like, well, I just don't want anybody to be hurt or killed or whatever. I'm thankful that Jesus is the judge. Thankful that God's the judge and not me. I don't know where that line is, but obviously Jesus is, and obviously his angels do. The first observation that I have is, if Jesus, by way of miracles and by way of just expounding the truth that he was, if Jesus couldn't convince people, if Jesus couldn't turn the tide, they're not turning. So they are set in their ways on evil and set in their ways on just doing things their own way. So I think the first thing that I would say in terms of an application is, Jesus literally said it, is that this is about the harvest at the very end of the age. This is Jesus speaking. Like, most people can't speak like in the present. Some people can kind of talk a little bit to the future. Jesus is talking to the extreme end. Like, he's talking about, okay, when it's all said and done, past tense, when the end is past tense. That's what he's talking about. This is what it's going to look like. And every person who has ever turned their back on God, everybody who has shook their fist at God, anybody who has perpetrated heinous and evil acts and done things in an evil way, which has been sown by the enemy, they're going to be judged. And then the people who have lived their lives in a way that's been pleasing to the Lord are also going to be judged. But the overwhelming sense that I get, and this is a hard reality, but I am so thankful. When I started this series, this was the first parable that came to mind. In fact, this parable came to mind before the series. Because I'm looking out. I don't know about you, but I watch the news. I see things happening all around us. I see things just happening in culture, and I'm observing these things. And I don't know about you, but I'm seeing all these things, and I'm like, there's a lot of weeds, isn't there? There's a lot of weeds. And so, I don't know about you, again, but like, for me, I'm asking, God, what are you doing about this? You know, in years past, when you think about the time of Noah, when you think about other times, God was just like, okay, I'm starting fresh. Just, let's just cut the whole lawn up and put new sod down. God has done that in the past. By the grace of God, he's being patient and merciful in this day and age, but it's hard. It's hard. And in the process of time, our calling is to remain evergreen, live for God. And not just live for God, but grow and bear fruit. That's a challenge, guys. That's a challenge. We're always going to have sin and evil with us. Jesus dealt with it. We're going to have to deal with it as well. So, number 2, if we're going to be evergreen, our MO, our method of operating cannot be fearful, worried, bitter, angry, hostile, cynical, fighting. None of those things. If we're going to remain evergreen, because you know what? If we do start to become like that, then what's happened? We've actually become a weed, haven't we? When we start shaking our fists, when we start fighting back, when we start beating the air, when we start arguing, when we start doing all of those things and put on these cynical glasses, we're robbed of any life that's in our faith. And I see Christians that are sometimes so consumed with fixing it, so consumed with getting their point across. There's no way they can live. They're so embittered. They're so on edge. Remember Jesus in the parable, he says, the servants asked us, do you want us to pull them up? Do you want us to take matters into our own hands? Do you want us to make this whole world look like a moonscape? Because we're going to set things right. And Jesus is like, no. You remain evergreen. You abide in the vine and produce fruit. That's your play. Let me do the God things and you do the great things. Right? You have a job to do, and that's just to live in me and be nourished of me. If you try and fight it out, you're going to do more damage. And then the third thing is the antithesis of all those other things, is that in turn then, what evergreen looks like is we have to be faithful, guys. It's hard. We have to be faithful. We have to be confident in our faith. We have to have the blessed assurance that we sang about. Not just whistling Dixie and going, oh, blessed assurance, Jesus is mine, and then go out and, do something that is completely evil. We have to be patient, consistent, and righteous, knowing that God in the end will judge. He's not the God of the Old Testament that was like, you know what, I'm wiping it all out and I'm starting from scratch. Now he sent his son and he's like, I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be gracious. As hard as it is for me to look at the world in the condition that it's in, and all of the pain and suffering that's going on, I'm going to be patient. We would do well to remember Romans 12, right? Don't be conformed any longer to the ways of the world, but be what? Transformed by the renewing of our minds. Like there's a job that we have to do, right? Don't be angry and bitter and all those things, but we have to push into the confidence that we have, the faith that we have, all those things. We have to nurture them like a gardener would, like somebody who was abiding in the vine would. Don't be conformed any longer to the ways of the world. And then, I was so taken back by this whole enemy piece, because a lot of us need to be reminded about the spiritual battle that is going on and has been going on all around us. There's a spiritual battle going on, and sometimes we just think, oh, well, if I could just have the conversation, or if I could just talk it out, or if I could just do this, or I could just do this practical thing. And it's like, no, this is a spiritual thing. This is so much bigger than you, right? I was reminded of these verses, put on the whole armor of God. We're not struggling against flesh and blood. We have to remember that there's a spiritual battle at play. There is an enemy. Jesus called him the devil. Have you ever seen the devil? No. Why? Because he's spiritual. And all of this is going on. And so if we're just looking through the physical eyes, we're only going to see such a small amount. I think it's in Peter. He says, submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Paul said in Romans, he said, we are more than conquerors through Jesus Christ, meaning that we're in a battle. Jesus literally said in John, he said, in this world you will have all the joys ever, and there will never be a weed anywhere. He said, no, in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. This Christianity thing, man, it's a long game. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not for the faint of heart. And if you're going to be green, there's work to be done. And then Peter, I love this verse. I actually thought, well, this is worth actually just reading. It says, be alert. This is for all of us, and this is not part of the parable. But Peter just says, and obviously Peter was there during that explanation, and so it kind of almost sounds like wisps of that conversation. He says, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, Prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resistance, standing firm in your faith. Makes me think of a big stalk of wheat. Standing firm in your faith because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And I think they'd be in church going, I thought we would love, like God loved us and we love God and we're cultivating our hearts and we're doing everything right. Why are there so many weeds? Why are we still suffering persecution? Why did my friend just get killed? All this evil in the world, where did it all come from? This, I think this parable answers it. Like for me, I have assurance. I don't like the answer. I got to be honest with you. I don't like the answer. I look around and I just want to fix some things in culture. I just want to wave my magic wand if I had one, or speak the name of Jesus and it just be finished. I'm like, you know what? I'm done with that. That is painful for so many people. Over. And if I was God, which I'm not, thank God, right? I would just like, no, that has to stop. Right? You think about sex trafficking, right? Like slavery. You're just like, God, I'm speechless. Seriously, if there was like an army of people that could go in and fix this, we would. And then you go back to him saying, yeah, that's exactly what we don't want to happen. And then you're like, which is the feeling that I get when I look at our parking lot. The feeling I get when I look, and the feeling I get spiritually when I look at this world. And I am thankful, guys, that Jesus gave us this picture. He gave us this picture. Because the fourth thing is that there's coming a day. There's coming a day when God will judge it all. There's coming a day when God will judge it all. And on that day, won't that just be the most relief? Okay, finally, something has been done about this, and it's all said and done. And why does he tarry? We've already mentioned it. He wants everybody to come to repentance. He doesn't want anybody to perish.
That's right.
Yesterday I was at the funeral of Lori Gibbons, who's our district superintendent and great pastor from Brantford area, planted a church there, and his impact is so huge, both in terms of his marriage, in terms of his parenting, in terms of his ministry to pastors, his leadership. It's just staggering to see the legacy this guy left. And it's funny because they talked about him mentoring pastors, and really it's just basically all the pastors. He mentored everybody, right? Because I said, I mentored him. Or sorry, I mentored him. That didn't come out right. I was mentored by him. And it, just the legacy. There was one comment that came up a number of times. Because, of course, Lori was, late 60s, passed away suddenly, had been in church leadership forever. And he was one of those guys that had seen it all, right? He's seen it all come and go. And so he's seen the flash in the pan ministries. He's seen the kind of sideways ministries. He's seen the, the weird stuff, the good stuff, the weird stuff, all that kind of stuff. And you know what? He had this comment when people say, hey, what do you think about this? He would say, we'll see. We'll see. Time will tell. Oh, what about this over here? You're like, wow, that's it. Well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. It'll be what it'll be. When I thought about this, I thought, you know what? God's up there and we're going, God, what about? And this and this and, all these things. And God's like, just wait. You'll see. You'll see. There's a day when I'm going to make it all right. There's a day when I'm going to make it all right. Until that time, our job, guys, our job is not to be conformed any longer to the ways of the world. To have alert, sober, and open eyes to the spiritual things all around us. To live for God, like Lori did, right? Loving God and other people, right? And all of that is in the face of and in the midst of the evil that is prevalent all around us. That's our calling. It's not a nice message. But you know what? We can do it, and we can honor God through it all. Amen? Let's pray. God, thank you for this.